Nailing the white balance of your photo, especially when it comes to skin tones, is one of the most common editing mistakes you can make. But nailing your white balance is one of the most important aspects of editing photos because your white balance, along with something like your exposure, is the foundation for your edit. So today I'm going to show you how you can nail your white balance every time using 3 examples in Lightroom Classic. Before we actually get started editing though, there's a couple things you need to make sure you do to set yourself up for success. Because your monitor and potentially even your environment could be sabotaging your photo editing and making it so that no matter how hard you try, you are not getting proper colors. The biggest thing here is using a monitor that can display colors accurately. I made a whole video about this, about picking the right monitor. You can watch that. I'll put it in the corner. But here are the basics. If you're editing on a really cheap monitor not designed to display colors accurately, you're going to be seeing the wrong colors, which means when you edit your photo a certain way, you're going to be compensating for how the monitor is making that photo look. And then when someone else views it on their phone or a different computer monitor, it's going to look completely different. So by editing on a monitor that's displaying the colors as accurately as possible, it'll look good on as many displays as possible. The second potential issue that not a lot of people think about is your ambient environment that you edit in. For example, if you're one of those people with blue LED lighting around the entire rim of their walls. If your whole room is lit up blue while you're editing, everything on your monitor is going to appear yellow just by comparison. So it's good to have not too much light in your room, just a little bit of ambient light, and it's important that that light is a neutral tone. Speaking of which, it's not helping a super ton that I have this giant softbox blasting in my face, but we're just gonna work through it. So why is getting the right white balance so important in the first place? It's one of the first things you set when you're editing an image, and it dictates how the rest of your edits turn out. And this can cause some serious effects on how people view your photos if you don't get it right. And this especially applies to skin tones. Our eyes are good at noticing when a skin tone is even kind of off. So having it look a natural color in each photo is really important. All right, let's just jump right into example number 1. Now this first example is a bit easier because there are no skin tones, so we don't have to worry about that. The first thing you have to do is look at the photo for what the colors actually are, not what they're supposed to be or what you know they are in real life. And that sounds confusing. But what I mean is pay attention to the snow here. Now, we all know snow is white, but is it white in this photo? At first, you might think, yeah, it's pretty close, but it's actually extremely blue. And we can see this if we zoom in a bunch. Let's go just like 400%. Like we're looking at a slightly tinted blue, maybe a tiny bit of magenta in there. Step 1, we're going to take our color dropper here and we're going to pick an area of the snow. And we're going to do this just to get a baseline. You might be looking at this now and saying that looks super yellow and weird. That doesn't look correct. But technically, it is. The reason it looks wrong is because of the environment and the fact that we know this is a snowy, cold area and the photo was taken in a shadowy kind of spot. So it feels wrong because 1, we were just looking at a very blue version and then it suddenly switched. And 2, because we know this environment should feel a little bit cold. It doesn't necessarily have to be perfectly white. So now that we have it correct, we're going to make it look more naturally correct. And now I'm going to bring the temperature slider just back into the blues a little bit. So now we have just the tiniest hint of blue in the snow here. So tint is just like white balance, but it's for magenta and greens. And this is one that you have to be very careful with. You need to adjust this like sometimes 1 or 2 points. So by default, the camera's settings had this at +6. This is looking pretty white in here. I'm not feeling this is leaning too magenta or green, but it's always okay to explore a little bit. So I'm just going to back it off. Let's go -2. And that's still feeling pretty good to me. Now, a good little test you can do here is remember where your slider was and drag it way further than it needs to be. Now this looks very green. We know that's wrong. And we can kind of slowly back it off until it feels a little more spot on. And this is looking very neutral and also natural. And once you have this down, this is where you can get a little more creative with the edits. If you felt like you wanted to edit this photo in a way that made it feel very blue and very like cold and stuff, and you wanted to really bring out that aspect of the image, you should still try and get your white balance in this kind of area first. And then if you want to add those creative color effects afterwards, you can go to your tone curve, for example, and then you can really add in your creative adjustments if you want to do that. So it's still a bit of a creative look, but it's coming across a lot more possible. Finding the correct white balance for your image is a lot more about understanding the context of the image itself and figuring out what colors look the most natural for the context of the image, rather than picking the exact white of the image. Moving on to our next example, we have a photo of Anthony that I took in Quebec, and this photo is going to be a little bit different because now we have skin tones. Before I do anything, I'm just gonna bring up my exposure a bit because it's a little underexposed. So a big part of this is finding the right skin tones. Because we don't have really anything else like perfectly white that needs to be perfectly white in this photo, I'm mostly going to focus on how the adjustments affect the skin, because that is the part that needs to be correct. We have a neutral black jacket and a neutral gray sky. Let's try color dropping this. This is just a good like kind of base point. I rarely stick with what this is, but let's just see what these are. That's looking a little yellow. I'm going to go with what the sky is giving us because that's feeling a little more correct. Now looking at the skin tones right here, and even you can see a little bit on the histogram. One, we want our skin tones to be just a little bit of a brighter area here. Getting the correct skin tone is about getting the exposure of the skin tone correctly, but also the color. So this is kind of a two-step process. First, I like to try and get the exposure down. Just looking at this as it is, his skin is looking a little bit on the yellow side. It's also, if you can look past the blue yellow shift and see if you can feel if it's a little bit green or magenta. If the image is looking green, it's gonna look a little more yellowy, tealy color. If the image is leaning a little more magenta, then the skin is going to look a little more towards the red because you're talking about magenta and yellow mixing. This is feeling a little bit on the green side to me. And zooming in like this also just helps focus on exactly what the skin tone is. And I'm just going to make this first a tiny bit colder. You see, if I go too much, now he's turning blue. So we know we're close. I'm just going to slowly bring this back until we're getting those naturally warm kind of colors in there. And that's feeling pretty close to me. A pursuit of the correct skin tone can lead to the skin tone looking very washed out. So first, I'm just going to give it a little bit of tint. I think we could use a little bit of magenta here. Again, I'm moving it like 3 points, right? Let's just do a comparison before and after. We're going a little bit too blue. I'm going to move that back to the warmth just a tiny bit. And I also think we're getting a little too bright in some of the brighter areas of the skin. So I'm just going to bring this back down. It's important to look at what you started with to just give your eyes context, because it's so easy to get locked in to what you are working on and forget kind of the context of the colors, because your eyes just get used to whatever you're looking at. I think we've got the correct white balance down now for his skin tone, but that white balance has given us a bit of a washed out look. So this is where you can bring in a little bit of saturation, a little bit of vibrance. If you come down to the HSL settings, you can also grab your oranges slider and just bring that up. I'm feeling good about that. This is where we started, and this is where we ended up. So we weren't too far off from the very start. Like, this is a pretty subtle adjustment. But now if I want to mess around creatively and like change the hues, the greens and the yellows and stuff, and get some really cool fall vibes going here, I know that as long as I'm not touching my oranges slider here, my skin tones are locked in how they should be. And there you have it. This is what we started with, and this is where we ended up. We didn't need to make a ton of changes to the skin tones, but we made sure that they were locked in so that when we made our creative adjustments, we didn't mess anything up. And our last photo is the most difficult example because we have two things in here. We have a dress that needs to look white, and we have skin tones that need to look like skin. There are two equally important things in this image that need to be the correct colors. So I'm gonna bring up the exposure. I ideally wanna bring this up to an exposure that gets your skin tones correct, but I know if I do that, I'm blowing out the dress here. I might blow out the background a little bit because she is a little bit darker in this image. So I'm going to leave her skin tones a little darker than I know they should be, because we're going to come back with a local adjustment to remedy that. Now you can see the dress is pretty bluish here, and her skin tone is also pretty cold because she's in the shade here. And that's going to leave us with, as you can see, if we just zoom really closely on this dress, yes, now we have a white looking dress, but the overall image is very warm. Because this is sunset and we already have some naturally warm colors coming in, we can kind of work with that the same way we did with the snowy photo, but just reverse, and take where this is now and just back it off a little bit. So we keep some of that warmth. We're going a little bit back to what feels more natural. And right around here, you can kind of tell when you start hitting in the more desaturated parts of the skin tone, you can start to see things will go to a gray, and then they'll start shifting into blue, and that's when you know you've gone too far. Now we have this, which is a good balance. So this is what we started with. We now have an almost white dress. It's still a little bit blue, and we've got some skin tones that are looking pretty good. I'm also going to play around with the tint now and just see if that feels off at all. So let's just back it off a little bit towards the green, and no, instantly that's feeling very green. So let's go a little bit back. As you can see, you just push a little too far one way until you know it's wrong, and then you back it off until you find the compromise. So this is about as close as we can get between getting the skin tones correct and getting the dress correct with a global adjustment. But the skin tones are still not really where we want them, and the dress is still a little bit blue in the shadier areas. We're gonna do 2 local adjustments. The first one, we're just going to take a brush and paint over just the shaded parts of the dress. And it's also important to note, the closer you bring something to white or black away from that mid-tone, the more desaturated it will get. So just by bringing up the exposure a bunch, I'm actually bringing the dress more into the white. As you can see, if I really drag it up here, now the dress is white and I didn't need to change any of the white balance adjustments. My point being, if we bring up the exposure a little bit, we actually need to use the temperature controls less. And now we're going to add a little bit of warmth, and just until this feels right here, I'm going to push it a little further just to make sure. And now we're definitely getting some yellowy tints in here. So we're going to back that back off. Now this is looking pretty darn white. We're going to add our next brush to the skin tone. Lightroom now has this great feature where you can just select people. Now we're just affecting the skin tone here. It's important to note, if we change this too much, it's going to look weird, but we're going to go a little bit more towards the warmth here. I want to bring a little more of that warm golden sunlight kind of skin tone out. This is feeling a good spot. Again, let's push it a little too far. That's looking really yellow, so let's bring it back to where we were. The reason I go a little over on one side and the other side is that I find the 2 points where I know it's pushing it too far, and then that really narrows it down, and I can go within those 2 points to figure out where the compromise is. So you pay attention when you push it too far to where it starts to look wrong, and you make that your cutoff point on one side, and you do it the other way and make a cutoff point on the other side, and then you can play within that area until you find what looks correct. That's looking pretty good, but again, because we've got the skin tone in a more neutral color, it has gotten, in certain parts of the more desaturated areas of the skin tone, it's gotten a little bit grayish. So now that we know our skin tones are foundationally the right color, or as close to the right color as we can get, we can now boost those colors up using saturation, and it still looks correct because we're just enhancing those already correct colors. And the last thing I'm going to do to get the skin tone correct is I'm going to bring up the exposure a little bit. All right, let's do a little reality check, see what we started with. This is what we had, and this is what we ended up with. Now, if you are still getting a little bit of blue or a little bit of purple in the shadows, which is natural when you're shooting white things, come down to your HSL, and now we can just take some saturation out of the purple, out of the blue, and we've got a nice white dress with correct skin tones without messing up the rest of the area. So now I'll go in here and I'll make some fun, more creative adjustments. Because I already now know what the correct skin tone should be because we have it here, I'm going to bring some color into my photo here, but I'm going to move it until we're bringing in basically the same color that the skin tone already is, which is definitely, it's looking somewhere around here. And you can tell because as you're moving this around, you get to a point where the skin tone almost starts to look natural. It won't because you're maxing out the saturation on here, but right about there. And then we just back it way, way down till it's almost completely off. And this is how you avoid that sepia bride issue. You edit the photo so that you have a correct skin tone or close to realistic feeling skin tone, and then you work your edit around that. This is what we started with, and this is where we ended up. Now, is this skin tone perfect, correct, technically accurate skin tone? No, but it is very close to the point where it's believable, and then we can have a little bit of creative licensing with how the final result looks. This is also something that just takes a little bit of time to develop with your eyes. So really take some time, slow down, creatively, really critically analyze your photos and look past what things are supposed to look like and focus on what the color actually is being displayed on your screen. But take your time, practice, and you will definitely develop an eye for this so that your photos have realistic, natural looking skin tones that fit your image and the context of your image without coming across as being too weird or off or causing any problems. That's all I got for you. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one.